The first time she called, he almost didn't answer. Unknown number. 3:04 in the morning. The kind of call that arrives at that hour usually means something has gone wrong somewhere, and Noah Carter, half asleep on his couch with the television still running, almost let it go to voicemail. He did not let it go to voicemail. He answered. And what came through the line was not an emergency. Not a wrong number announcement. Not a drunk dial from a stranger. What came through the line was a woman's voice, low and exhausted and completely unguarded, saying, "I just needed to hear your voice tonight. I know it's late. I know I keep doing this. I just needed to know someone was still there." Noah sat up slowly in the dark. He understood, within the first 10 seconds, that she believed she was talking to someone else entirely. He understood within the first 30 seconds that whoever that person was, they were no longer able to answer this call themselves. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, because he was a man who had spent 34 years being careful about most things and careless about almost none of them, he made the single most reckless decision of his entire life. "I'm here," he said quietly. "I'm right here." She exhaled, like something had been held for a very long time and finally found somewhere safe to land. He picked up every time she called after that. 11 more times over the following 4 months. He never once told her who he actually was. And by the time she found out the truth, something had already happened between them that neither of them had language for yet, because it had grown in the dark, quietly, out of grief and kindness and the specific, impossible tenderness of a stranger who kept picking up the phone. Noah Carter was 34 years old and worked as a high school English teacher in a mid-sized town in Vermont, the kind of place where people knew each other's names and the winters lasted longer than anyone ever fully made peace with. He had lived alone for 2 years, since his last relationship ended the way many things in Noah's life ended, not in conflict but in the quiet exhaustion of two people who had wanted different things for long enough that wanting them together had simply run out of room. He was, by most external measures, a steady person. The kind of man his students described as calm, his colleagues described as reliable, and his mother described, with a fondness that carried mild frustration, as someone who thought too much before he said anything. He read widely. He cooked when he had the energy. He called his sister on Thursday evenings. He had, by his own private accounting, built a life that was largely fine, occasionally good, and almost never remarkable. He was not unhappy. He was simply living at a careful distance from anything that might require him to be braver than fine. The night the first call came, he had fallen asleep on the couch while grading papers, a half-empty cup of tea on the coffee table beside him, the television showing something he had stopped watching an hour earlier. His phone lit up at 3:04 a.m. He answered it, and nothing in his careful, measured, entirely fine life was the same after that. Her name was Claire Ashford. Noah did not learn this until the third call. What he understood from the first call, assembled carefully from the things she said and the way she said them, was the shape of a grief too large to sleep through. She had lost her brother. His name had been Liam, 29 years old, a carpenter who had lived in the same Vermont town as Claire, who had been her closest person in a family that had otherwise scattered across different states and different versions of the lives they had each chosen. Liam had died 4 months before the first call, suddenly, in the specific cruel way that some deaths arrive. No warning, no preparation, no chance to say the things that people only think to say when they realize saying them has become urgent. A brain aneurysm. Tuesday afternoon. He had been at work. He had not been sick. He had been 39 years old and entirely alive, and then, in the space of one ordinary Tuesday, he had not been. Claire had not recovered from this in the way people sometimes describe recovering from grief, as though it were an illness with a standard course and a predictable end. She had instead been moving through the months since in the specific manner of someone who wakes up every day and chooses, carefully and with considerable effort, to continue functioning, even when functioning feels like a performance put on for the benefit of everyone around her. At night, the performance became impossible. At night, particularly in the small hours between 2 and 4 in the morning when the specific darkness of grief is at its most unrelenting, she called Liam's number. Not because she believed he would answer, because calling was the only thing that made the distance between here and gone feel, for a few seconds, like something she could cross rather than simply stare across. His number had been reassigned 3 months after his death, which was not something Claire knew, because nobody tells you these things, because the world does not particularly concern itself with the specific cruelties of grief logistics. The first time Noah answered, she had already called the number 11 times in the 4 months prior and gotten voicemail every time. She had not expected anyone to pick up. Neither had he. "I just needed to hear your voice tonight." That was what she had said. Noah held those 8 words for a long time after the call ended, sitting alone in the dark of his living room at 3:17 a.m., the television still running something nobody was watching. The call had lasted 13 minutes. He had said almost nothing. 3 or 4 sentences at most, carefully chosen, carefully vague. He had let her talk, which she needed to do more than she needed any specific response from him, and he had listened the way he had spent 11 years learning to listen to 17-year-olds who were trying to tell him something important underneath the thing they were technically saying. She had talked about Liam, about a specific memory that had surfaced that day without warning, the two of them at 14 and 16 years old, stealing their mother's car at midnight to drive to a diner 20 minutes away because Claire had wanted pancakes and Liam had never once in his life refused his sister anything she actually needed. She had laughed, telling it, a small, surprised laugh, like the memory had arrived with warmth she hadn't expected and didn't quite know what to do with. Then she had gone quiet. Then she had said, "I miss you so much it feels like a physical thing. Like something I'm carrying around in my chest that doesn't have anywhere to go. And then, I should let you sleep. Thank you for picking up." And then the call had ended. Noah sat with the phone in his hand for nearly 20 minutes after. He understood, with complete clarity, exactly what had happened. The reassigned number, the grief, the 11 voicemails she had likely left before that night that had gone unheard by anyone who knew her or Liam. He should have said something immediately. In the first 10 seconds, when he understood she believed she was talking to her dead brother. He had not said something immediately. And now 13 minutes had passed, and she had laughed once, and she had said thank you for picking up, and the thought of calling back to explain that he was not Liam, that Liam could not pick up and could not hear her and would never pick up again, felt like the single most devastating thing he could do to another human being at 3:17 on a Tuesday morning. He told himself he would call back in the morning. He did not call back in the morning. He did not call back at all. Because before he had figured out what to do about any of it, 11 days later, at 3:09 a.m., his phone lit up again. He picked up the second call. He picked up the third and the fourth, and every one that followed across the next 4 months, 12 calls in total, spaced unevenly across the weeks the way grief moves, sometimes quiet for a stretch, then arriving all at once in the small hours when the dark becomes too heavy to simply lie underneath. He said very little. This was both deliberate and instinctive. He understood that she was not calling for a conversation in the conventional sense. She was calling because Liam's number was the number she reached for when the grief became unmanageable, and the sound of someone answering, the simple human fact of someone being there, was what she actually needed. Not words. Presence. So he offered presence. He listened to her talk about Liam, about their childhood in a small town in upstate New York, the two of them close in the particular way siblings become close when a family is not entirely stable, when they become each other's primary point of reference and safety. About Liam's work, the way he talked about wood, the way other people talked about living things, about the grain and the weight, and the way different materials wanted to be shaped differently, and you had to learn to listen to them rather than force them. About the last conversation she'd had with him, ordinary and brief, a Tuesday morning phone call about whether she was coming home for Thanksgiving, both of them assuming there was time for all the more important conversations later. There is never as much later as people assume. Noah knew this. He had been teaching 17-year-olds long enough to know that the conversations people regret not having, are rarely the complicated ones. They are almost always the simple ones, the ones that felt too ordinary to prioritize. On the fifth call, Claire told him something she said she had not told anyone else. "I feel guilty," she said, at 3:22 in the morning, her voice carrying the specific quiet of someone confessing something they have been carrying alone for a long time. "Not because I think I did anything wrong. I know I didn't do anything wrong. But because I was the last person in the family to see him the Friday before and I was distracted and I rushed the goodbye, and I keep thinking if I had known I would have stood in that doorway for 100 years. I would have memorized every single thing. I would have said every word I had been saving for later." Noah closed his eyes. "You didn't know," he said quietly. "That's not guilt. That's love with nowhere left to go." A long silence. Then, "How do you always know exactly what to say?" He did not answer that. He had no honest answer to give. What Claire did not know, across those 12 calls, was what each one cost Noah specifically. Not in any practical sense. The calls were not long. They did not disrupt his life in any measurable way. What they cost him was the specific, cumulative weight of knowing something that would devastate the person he was listening to and choosing every single time not to say it. He had told himself, after the first call, that he would correct the mistake before the second. After the second, that he would correct it before the third. By the fourth call, he had stopped telling himself he would correct it and started simply sitting with the fact that he had made a choice, repeatedly, that he could not undo, and trying to understand, honestly, why he kept making it. The honest answer, which he arrived at somewhere around the sixth call and did not entirely know what to do with, was layered.
Part of it was simple human compassion.
Telling Claire the truth meant telling her, in real time, in the middle of her grief, that the number she had been calling as a lifeline for months had been reassigned without her knowledge, that the voicemails she had left in the immediate aftermath of Liam's death had gone to a stranger's phone, that the connection she believed she still had to her brother through this one remaining thread was not what she thought it was. The cruelty of that truth, delivered at 3 a.m. to someone already barely surviving their grief, felt like more than compassion allowed. But there was another part, quieter and more complicated, that Noah was slower to name even to himself. He had started looking forward to the calls. Not in a way he was proud of. Not in a way he could defend particularly well, if he tried. But in the specific way that a man who had spent 2 years living at a careful distance from anything requiring genuine emotional risk found himself, across 12 3 a.m. phone calls with a grieving stranger, feeling more present and more real than he had felt in longer than he could honestly account for. He knew her laugh. He knew the particular way her voice shifted when a memory arrived unexpectedly and surprised her with its warmth. He knew she drank tea at night and that she had a cat named after a character from a book he happened to have taught 2 years running. He knew she was brave in a way she didn't give herself credit for, because surviving the kind of grief she was carrying, quietly, mostly alone, at 3 a.m. over and over again, was one of the braver things he had ever had the privilege of witnessing. He was falling in love with a woman who thought she was talking to her dead brother.
He understood how that sounded.
He also understood, with a clarity that made it worse rather than better, that there was no version of this that ended without causing her real pain. The only question was how much. The crack came on the 9th call. It had been a different night than the others. Less raw. Claire's voice carried something Noah had not heard before in 8 calls, something lighter, something that sounded, tentatively, and without committing to it fully, like the earliest, most fragile edges of something almost like okay. She talked about a project she had started. Volunteering at a community woodworking shop on weekends, something she had decided to do 3 weeks earlier in a moment she described as either inspired or completely unhinged, because she had never worked with wood in her life, but she had wanted to be somewhere that Liam would have understood, doing something that would have made him laugh at her, and then patiently teach her how to do it properly. "I'm terrible at it," she said. Genuinely, embarrassingly terrible. "Last Saturday, I measured the same board 4 times and still cut it wrong." Noah laughed before he could stop himself. A real laugh, unpracticed, surprised out of him by the image of it. Claire went quiet. Not the quiet of someone offended. The quiet of someone who has heard something unexpected and is trying to place it.
You sound different tonight, she said.
Noah's heart stopped. What do you mean? He said carefully. I don't know, she said. Your laugh. It sounded different.
It sounded, she paused.
It doesn't matter. I'm probably just tired. It matters, he almost said. He did not say it. But the crack was there now, running through everything, and he understood with absolute certainty that the clock had started on a reckoning he had been deferring for 9 calls. The 10th call was the hardest. She called at 3:31 a.m. on a Saturday, which was unusual. The calls typically came on weekdays when the week's accumulated weight finally tipped past what sleep could absorb. She sounded different from the first word. Not worse. Not another layer of grief breaking open. Different in a way that took Noah several minutes to identify, and when he did identify it, the recognition arrived with a complication he had not anticipated. She sounded like someone who had been thinking about him. Not Liam. Him. The voice on the phone. I've been trying to understand something, she said, about 20 minutes into the call. And I don't know how to say it without it sounding strange. Say it anyway, Noah said, against every instinct he possessed. Talking to you at night, she said, talking to you like this for months, it doesn't feel the same as it used to. It used to feel like reaching back, like holding on to something I was losing. But lately it feels like something else, like reaching towards something rather than reaching back. And I don't know what to do with that. Noah sat with that in the dark for a long time. I think, he said finally very carefully, that maybe that's what grief is supposed to do eventually. Not let go. Change direction. A long silence. You've changed, she said quietly. Since the beginning. You're not the same. He said nothing. I don't mean it badly, she continued. I mean it like, you're more here. More present. You say things that I carry around for days afterward and think about. And I know that probably sounds strange given everything. It doesn't sound strange, he said honestly. She was quiet for a moment. I'm not ready to say what I think I might be starting to feel, she said. I'm not sure I'm allowed to feel it. But I wanted to say that these calls have kept me alive this year in a way I don't know how to fully explain. And whoever you are right now, whatever version of you is on the other end of this phone at 3 a.m, I'm grateful for you. Noah closed his eyes. He understood he had run out of time entirely. He called her back the next morning. Not at 3 a.m. Not in the dark. At 10:15 on a Sunday morning, when the light was ordinary and the world was awake and there was no grief dark to soften what he needed to say. She answered on the second ring. Hello, she said, her voice carrying the specific confusion of someone who does not recognize the number calling.
Claire, he said.
My name is Noah Carter. I'm a high school English teacher in Vermont. 4 months ago, my phone received a call at 3 a.m. from a number I didn't recognize. I answered it. I should have told you immediately that you had the wrong number. I didn't. And I need to explain why, and I need you to hear all of it before you decide what to do with it. The silence that followed was the longest of his life. 12 seconds. He counted. Then what? 1 word. But the weight of it was enormous. He told her everything. The first call. The 13 minutes. The decision he had made and remade every time her number appeared on his screen at 3 a.m. The voicemails she had likely left in the months before, which he had never received because the number had only been his since September. All of it. She said nothing through any of it. When he finished, the silence stretched long enough that he began to genuinely wonder if she had put the phone down. Then, how long? For months, he said. 12 calls. Another silence. You knew the whole time, she said, that I thought I was talking to my brother. Yes, he said. And you never said anything. No. Why? He had prepared for this question. Had rehearsed different versions of the answer across the 24 hours between the 10th call and this morning. None of the prepared versions came out. What came out instead was, because the first time you called, you said you just needed to know someone was still there. And I could not make myself be the person who told you at 3 a.m. that no one was. The silence after that was different from the ones before it. He could not read it. He waited. She did not speak to him for 9 days. He did not call. He did not text. He had given her the truth, and the space was hers to do with whatever she needed. On the 9th day, at 10:22 in the morning, his phone rang. Her number. He answered immediately. "I've spent 9 days being angry at you," she said, without preamble. "I want you to know that. I've been genuinely, completely furious." "I know," he said. "You had every right. I called my grief counselor the morning after you told me," she continued. "I told her what happened. All of it. She said something I've been thinking about ever since." "What did she say?" Noah asked. "She said that grief finds its way toward what it needs," Claire said quietly, "and that sometimes what it needs looks nothing like what we expected." She said that the fact that I started feeling something shift in those calls, something that stopped being about reaching back and started being about reaching forward, wasn't a betrayal of Liam. It was proof that I was still alive enough to feel something moving in me again. Noah was very still. "I'm still angry," Claire said. "I need you to know that isn't gone."
"I understand," he said.
"But I also," she continued, "spent 9 days trying to be angry at the specific thing you actually did, which was answer the phone when I called in the middle of the night, and then keep answering, and then say the things that kept me moving through the hardest months of my life. And I keep arriving at the same place." "What place?" he asked. "That I'm not able to call what you did a cruelty," she said.
"Even when I want to."
"Because whatever the lie was, you showed up for me in the dark 12 times when I had nobody else, and I was never actually talking to my brother. I was talking to you. And somewhere in those calls, without knowing it was happening, I started talking to you specifically. Not to a memory.
To you."
Noah felt something ease in his chest that had been tight for 9 days. "What do you want to do with that?" he asked. She was quiet for a moment.
"I want to meet you," she said.
"In person. So I can be angry at an actual face rather than a voice on a phone." He almost smiled.
"Tell me when," he said.
She told him. She had suggested a coffee shop in the town where she lived, 40 minutes from Noah's apartment. A detail that had not surprised him. Vermont was a small state, and grief had a way of keeping people close to the places that contained it. He arrived first. She walked in 12 minutes later, and he recognized her the same irrational way he suspected she would recognize him, not from any photograph, because neither of them had exchanged one, but from the voice. She spotted him immediately. She sat down across from him and looked at him directly for a long moment without speaking. Then she said, "You look like someone who answers the phone." He looked back at her. "You sound exactly like someone worth answering for," he said. She looked away for a moment, collecting something. Then she reached into her bag and set something on the table between them. A small photograph, worn at the edges. 2 people, a teenage boy and a teenage girl, grinning in a diner booth, a plate of pancakes between them, the image clearly taken on someone else's phone without their full knowledge.
"That's the night I told you about," she said.
"With the car." Noah looked at the photograph for a long time. "He looks like someone who would have answered the phone too," Noah said quietly. Claire looked at the photograph.
"He would have," she said.
"He absolutely would have." They sat with that for a moment, the 3 of them in a way, in a coffee shop on a Tuesday morning, grief and the living and the very strange grace of a wrong number that had somehow, impossibly, delivered exactly what it was always supposed to. Noah answered a call that was never meant for him, from a woman who needed someone to be there at 3 a.m. when the grief became too heavy to carry through the night alone. He could have said wrong number. He could have said, "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong person." He said, "I'm here" instead. And in saying it, 12 times over 4 months, in the dark, at the cost of a truth he owed her, and kept trying to give back, he became, without planning to, the person who helped her find her way from reaching back to reaching forward. Liam's number was reassigned because the world does not pause for grief. But sometimes the world reroutes things toward exactly where they need to go anyway. Sometimes a wrong number is the universe's quietest, most improbable act of care. If someone came to mind while you were listening to this, someone who answered when you called, even when they didn't have to say their name in the comments, Just their name. Nothing else. Follow Maleek Whisper Stories for a new story every week. Because every silence hides a feeling. And sometimes the most important calls are the ones nobody expected to answer.